conservative in the early rounds, throws so few punches, and he lets you work. He lets you work, and you're backing up, and you're always afraid of that power, and he's just moving in, trying to find that opening where he just gets in there on you.
Joe Rogan opened his commentary with a simple, blunt observation about Gervonta "Tank" Davis that cuts to the heart of why this matchup has everyone talking. Rogan didn't dress it up with boxing jargon or hyperbole. He simply described what makes Tank dangerous: the combination of patience, timing, and explosive finishing ability. From there, he pivoted to Jake Paul, the polarizing entertainer turned boxer, and warned that the world Paul has been living in inside the boxing ring might not prepare him for what Tank brings. Rogan's tone was part expert, part concerned observer, and part storyteller, the kind of mix that has built his podcast into a place where combat sports debates become moments of cultural commentary. You could tell he wasn't interested in piling on or cheering for drama. He wanted the public and Jake to understand risk, nuance, and the reality of stepping into the ring with a proven knockout artist. This essay expands that conversation carefully, using Rogan's initial warning as the spine for a deeper look into styles, stakes, and what the fight means for both men's legacies.
His technique was perfect. He was crisp. His technique was so crisp. And
Rogan started by breaking down Davis's style and why it is uniquely dangerous on fight night. He pointed to that rare blend of low activity early with explosive fight-ending shots later, a boxer who can let opponents feel comfortable and then instantly change the complexion of a bout. There's artistry in that approach, and Rogan emphasized how deceptively simple it can look when a fighter is that dialed in. Small, efficient movements, perfect timing, and an ability to turn minimal offensive output into maximal impact. For Rogan, it's not just raw power. It's the combination of punch placement, rhythm disruption, and the psychological wait and strike approach that makes Davis such a menace. He also noted the compact physicality that doesn't scream knockout artist in the way a broader-shouldered fighter might, making the power more shocking when it arrives. In short, Rogan argued, Davis doesn't have to outwork you. He needs one opening, and he'll end the night.
Technique was so sharp. I always admired guys who were able to find like the shortest path.
From there, Rogan shifted to Jake Paul, and his appraisal was balanced. Respect for the work Paul has done, mixed with caution about the limits of Paul's competition so far. Rogan gave Paul credit where it's due, acknowledging the YouTuber's dedication, growth, and the real skill set he's developed in the ring. But Rogan also reminded listeners that Paul's resume, impressive to some and suspect to others, has largely consisted of opponents who are not elite, proven power punchers in the way Tank is. That discrepancy, Rogan warned, is not a small matter. It is the difference between a career built on promotion and one built on elite-level competition. Rogan's critique was targeted and specific. Paul has improved, but there's a gulf between fighting boxing-adjacent celebrities and stepping into the ring with a world champion who can end fights with a single, precisely timed strike.
This Jake Paul dude coming up, he's fucking for real. Because nothing about watching him fight screams like he's in over his head. If it wasn't that big YouTube.
The conversation naturally moved to the physical mismatch and spectacle angle that has dominated headlines. The weight difference, the exhibition rules, and the financial incentives pulling this together. Rogan was candid about how odd the numbers look on paper, Paul walking around near cruiserweight, while Tank is a compact lightweight star. He described the spectacle quality frankly, noting how boxing's current era increasingly blends sport with celebrity theater. But Rogan did not reduce everything to cynicism. He examined the practical implications of the matchup, focusing on how a smaller but faster man can exploit a bigger opponent's slower timing and how a larger man can still become a dangerous problem if he connects cleanly. The weight gap raises legitimate safety and integrity questions, Rogan said, but it doesn't automatically determine the outcome. Instead, it shifts what kind of tactics each fighter should employ and what risks each is taking for reputation and career.
This Jake Paul dude coming up, he's fucking for real. Because nothing about watching him fight screams like he's in over his head. If it wasn't that big YouTube.
Rogan then analyzed specific scenarios that could play out inside the ring, using concrete, technical language rather than vague speculation. He suggested that Tank's best path is to use superior footwork and head movement to stay out of Paul's heavy, looping strikes and to attack the body consistently, jabs and short hooks to sap Paul's legs and slow him down. Rogan predicted a methodical approach: take away Paul's base, create angles, then time the explosive shot when Paul overcommits. For Paul, Rogan argued, the strategy must be to cut off the ring, use reach to control distance, and land heavy straight punches early to discourage Davis from setting traps. Rogan warned that if Paul tries to slug it out without disciplined range management, he risks exposing himself to the very single blow that can end the fight. These were not throwaway comments. They were practical game plans that highlighted Rogan's understanding of boxing technique and strategy.
To connecting with a shot, where it's just like the technique is so dialed in. There's guys that...
Another theme running through Rogan's warning was the reputational risk to Tank Davis. Rogan acknowledged that the smaller fighter stands to lose more in public perception if he fails to win emphatically. A loss to a larger, less experienced opponent, even in an exhibition, would have ripple effects within boxing fandom and among purists. Rogan framed this as a complex trade-off. Davis gains financial upside and mainstream exposure, but he also risks diluting the narrative that has been carefully curated around his status as an elite lightweight. Conversely, Rogan noted, Paul's upside is largely promotional. A win over Tank would deliver credibility, exposure, and a seismic payday that could rewrite parts of his controversial narrative. That asymmetry, Rogan said, creates a dynamic where both fighters are gambling, but for very different returns.
Like Gervonta Davis is like that. Their technique's so dialed in that when you watch them uncork, it's like, oh my God.
Rogan's podcast didn't shy away from the emotional and psychological aspects of preparing for a fight this strange. He observed how Paul thrives on attention and how his promotional instincts shape his training and fight selection. Rogan offered thoughtful commentary on how an athlete's identity, whether forged in YouTube virality or traditional boxing gyms, affects mental preparation. Jake's mental game, Rogan argued, includes a comfort with spectacle that can be both an asset and liability. Paul knows how to stay emotionally alive for big events, but he may also underestimate the focused menace of a veteran killer like Tank. For Davis, the mental work is about staying grounded and not allowing the peculiarity of the fight, the size difference, the exhibition status, to become a distraction. Rogan emphasized that mental sharpness in the ring is as crucial as physical readiness, and that cognitive discipline can be the difference between a tactical masterclass and a headline-making upset.
Like Gervonta Davis is like that. Their technique's so dialed in that when you watch them uncork, it's like, oh my...
Rogan also invited outside perspectives during his breakdown, referencing fighters and pundits who had weighed in on the matchup with skepticism or alarm. He quoted critics who saw the fight as a mockery of the sport, and he also highlighted voices that recognized the legitimacy of Paul's boxing progress. Rogan's point was not to pick sides. It was to show the complexity of modern boxing discourse where finances, entertainment, and competition blur. He argued that dismissing Paul out of hand would be a mistake, just as ignoring the integrity concerns would be short-sighted. Rogan encouraged a more nuanced public conversation, one that can simultaneously critique the spectacle while recognizing genuine pockets of talent.
This Jake Paul dude coming up, he's fucking for real. Because nothing about watching him fight screams like he's in over his head. If it wasn't that big YouTube...
A recurring note in Rogan's warning was respect for what boxing used to mean to purists and how the sport is evolving. He painted a picture of a shifting industry where marketable matchups sometimes trump equitable competition and where fighters with followings can access opportunities that historically would have required long, meritocratic climbs. Yet Rogan was careful to avoid moralizing. He presented this as a reality of the modern attention economy, not simply a decline. To him, the question was less about nostalgia and more about preserving certain standards, safety protocols, weight fairness, and competitive legitimacy. Rogan urged fans and promoters to think critically about how boxing balances spectacle with integrity, and he warned that failing to do so could cost the sport long-term credibility, even as it generates short-term cash.
There's guys that like Gervonta Davis is like that. Their technique's so dialed in that when you watch them uncork, it's like, oh my God, the efficiency of it.
Moving from macro to micro, Rogan examined technical aspects of how Tank's punches generate power despite his smaller frame. He pointed out the compact mechanics, torque, hip rotation, and the ability to load on the back leg that make Tank's strikes feel heavier than his size suggests. Rogan discussed how certain punch geometries and short, explosive trajectories are harder to see and harder to defend, especially when a fighter is exceptionally patient and chooses moments with the precision of a sniper. That tiny window, where a boxer can suddenly deliver a full-power shot while the opponent is mid-exchange, is what Rogan described as the most dangerous part of Tank's game. He stressed that those defensive lapses are often invisible to casual viewers, but lethal in practice.
The first few rounds, he throws very few punches.
He's just measuring. He's a computer, man.
Yep.
He's just getting the data on you, faking you, taking pictures.
Rogan's analysis did not neglect the defensive work Paul has shown in recent fights. He acknowledged Paul's improved footwork, his growing appreciation for the jab, and a proclivity for body shots that have helped him secure stoppages in some of his previous matchups. However, Rogan immediately tempered praise with technical caveats. Paul's defense can still be breached by elite-level timing and counters, and his tendency to throw wide, looping punches leaves him vulnerable to shorter, straighter shots. Rogan noted that Paul's ring IQ has improved, but elite fighters can exploit small errors consistently. This balanced appraisal allowed Rogan to respect Paul's growth without inflating it into parity with a world-class knockout artist.
Everything you do, and then like round 3, round 4, he starts to fucking and he's slipping, pop, pop, pop.
He's got special power too. His power.
The discussion also moved to the role trainers and sparring partners play in preparing each man for this peculiar fight. Rogan emphasized how critical the sparring camp is, not just for physical conditioning, but for pattern recognition and mental rehearsal. For Tank, sparring with larger partners who can replicate Paul's size and style could be essential to feel out timing and distance. For Paul, drilling against quicker, smaller southpaws or compact counterpunchers would sharpen responses and timing. Rogan suggested that mismatches in camp preparation could be as decisive as the matchups themselves. If a fighter trains primarily in comfortable paradigms, he might be stunned when an opponent executes differently on fight night. The message was clear: preparation must be bespoke, not generic.
Power special.
And he's mean too.
Oh yeah. Mean is a big part of it, isn't it?
I think having that dog.
Rogan then addressed the rule set, exhibition versus sanctioned bout, and why that distinction matters beyond semantics. An exhibition can alter both fighters' incentives. It can reduce or heighten risk depending on how it's framed and enforced. Rogan said that if the exhibition allows for knockouts and features lenient medical oversight, the match still carries the same physical danger even if the official label suggests otherwise. He argued that safety measures, refereeing standards, and pre-fight medical protocols should be non-negotiable regardless of promotional language. This was not a legal lecture, but a practical appeal to promoters and regulators to maintain standards that protect athletes and the sport's credibility.
Being mean is like the biggest part in it, you know? You be a great athlete, one day you're gonna come across another great athlete, you know?
Rogan's warning also included a generous helping of historical context, calling back to other mismatched fights where public perception shifted dramatically after an upset. He reminded listeners that mismatches have produced both memorable upsets and long-term damage to careers, and he used those examples to underscore the reputational stakes for Tank. Rogan talked about the fans' memories, the single image or knockout that can define a boxer's public narrative for years, and how fragile reputation can be when one moment is broadcast worldwide. For Paul, Rogan noted, a win would be a cultural event. For Tank, a loss would be a headline that demands explanation. These asymmetric outcomes were central to Rogan's concern.
And Jake Paul,
Jake Paul was a promoter?
Yeah, without Jake Paul, that fight doesn't happen. He
didn't stop at technique and reputation. Rogan dug into the business calculus. He explored how streaming platforms, PPV models, and celebrity-driven marketing reshape who gets fights and why. Rogan did not condemn money-making outright. Instead, he recognized that athletes deserve to monetize their skill. But he questioned whether certain matchups, driven primarily by profit, might accelerate a troubling trend where competitive meritocracy is sidelined. He asked whether the monetary windfall is worth the cost of muddying competitive records, altering public perception of champions, and potentially normalizing what he called money fights over meaningful ranked competition. Rogan's critique was less about greed and more about long-term stewardship of boxing's ecosystem.
Full-on promoter now?
Yeah, absolutely.
The kid's got to hustle. You got to give it to him. The kid's got hustle.
Turning to counter-arguments, Rogan acknowledged voices that praised the matchup as an evolution, the sport tapping into new audiences and introducing traditional boxing to millions who would otherwise not watch. He conceded that a well-staged event with skilled performers can elevate public interest and spark conversations that benefit the sport's profile. Rogan wasn't blind to these gains, but he insisted that exposure alone is not an unmitigated good. Without safeguards and a commitment to competitive pathways, he argued, something valuable about boxing's lineage could be lost. He proposed a middle road: promote and monetize these events while preserving pathways for legitimately earned titles and insisting on safety and fairness.
Kid's got hustle.
He is a successful hustler. I don't even know. I think he might be. He's got hustle. Or he's not a hustler. This guy is a legitimate businessman.
Yeah, legit.
Rogan's final technical point returned to the ring: timing. He concluded that timing is the great equalizer in this matchup. A perfectly timed short punch can trump mass and reach. Conversely, imprecise timing by a bigger fighter can leave him exposed. Rogan illustrated this with analogies from other combat sports and even hunting metaphors. The idea that patience, observation, and the willingness to wait for a moment are as lethal as brute force. He urged Paul not to mistake size for immunity, and he urged Tank not to be dazzled by payday over the need to protect his legacy. Rogan's voice throughout had been clear: this is a fight to be respected, not one to be trifled with.
Legitimate businessman.
Yeah, legitimate
doing
businessman, but
major things.
he makes so much money doing other shit that the fact that he wants to do that as well.
After laying out scenarios and consequences, Rogan returned to tone and temperament, the kind of fighter each man is when the lights go out. He described Paul as a showman who has learned the discipline of boxing enough to be dangerous, and Tank as a natural assassin who picks his moments. The match, Rogan said, is therefore a collision of philosophies: promotion versus precision, volume versus patience, spectacle versus craft. That framing helped listeners understand why the scrap resonates beyond the simple question of who wins. It's a cultural touchpoint about how modern sport is made, marketed, and consumed.
Well, and promote fights as well. I'm impressed.
He put her on his undercard. She got a lot of visibility.
Rogan also addressed the fans directly in his warning. He asked listeners to be honest about why they were watching: curiosity, schadenfreude, or a sincere love of boxing, and how those motives shape the sport's trajectory. He suggested that consumer demand drives promoter behavior, and that educated, discerning viewership could nudge the sport toward better choices. This was an invitation rather than a reprimand. If fans want meaningful matchups, they should signal that preference with their attention and money. Rogan's point was democratic. The market listens to viewers, and those viewers must decide the future they want for boxing.
The visibility there. People in boxing, of course, were already familiar with her, but it gave her much bigger notoriety by big.
Finally, Rogan closed with a pragmatic plea: respect the fighters as athletes and maintain standards that keep competition meaningful and participants safe. He admitted that these fights will continue. Money, fame, and the appetite for spectacle are powerful forces. But he argued that a more thoughtful approach benefits everyone. Whether Paul wins or Tank prevails, Rogan insisted, the sport should not let a single event rewrite the rules of what it values. His warning was not a prediction so much as a reminder: the ring is unforgiving, and both men should be treated with the seriousness they deserve.
On his cards, and then he and Eddie Hearn put this fight together. Again, I can't stress it enough, a sold out, an actual match.
Rogan's warning was not alarmist. It was a layered observation grounded in technique, history, and a concern for what the sport becomes. He asked for seriousness in an arena increasingly tempted by spectacle, and that request deserves attention from fans and officials alike. If you tune in, do so with curiosity and a critical eye. Appreciate the craft where it appears and call out lapses where safety or fairness is compromised. Enjoy the drama, but don't let spectacle alone be the metric for what we value in boxing. Celebrate genuine skill and honest competition, and remember that one fight can elevate or tarnish careers in ways that last far beyond a single night. The November fight will be more than a contest. It will be a statement about modern boxing's direction. Whether it becomes an instructive moment or a regrettable spectacle depends on how fighters, officials, and fans respond. Until the bell rings, Rogan's words remain a prudent reminder: respect the ring, respect the athletes, and respect the consequences of what we choose to watch.